Okay, today I am going to talk about defensiveness. Doesn't it seem like people are just defensive all the time? They're defensive about all sorts of stuff, whether it be politics, whether it be the economy, whether it be the government, but people are incredibly defensive. It's hard to talk with someone when they're reacting so strongly. And some people are hypersensitive when it comes to having a different opinion or criticizing. They react in such a strong way that it's almost like it just shuts down the conversation. Well, I see this a lot with couples in my office. A lot of times couples are defensive with one another, and that defensiveness and that justification and that blame just keeps them going in circles. It keeps them stuck. It prevents them from getting better, from healing, and from working through their conflicts. Defensiveness, justification, and blame are a pattern that I see over and over again with couples. Sometimes they come in and I start with talking with them about some of their frustrations, which is common in a relationship, but the frustration often leads to anger, which also is not that uncommon in marriage. But when the anger is not resolved, it turns into resentment. Resentment is anger with a history that's been around for a long time. So many of the couples I see have conflict, but never get to the resolution part of conflict. And as a result, it just builds and builds until it leads to resentment. And if the resentment is not addressed, it turns into detachment, where couples start to grow apart and disengage from one another. And the final phase of this vicious cycle is self-destructive behavior, where one or both parties begin to self-destruct through maybe infidelity or pornography or drugs or alcohol abuse, spending money. But that's a pattern that I see so much in my practice, in my office. But defensiveness is something that relates not just to relationships, but to friendships, to family members. Why is it that people can be so defensive? Maybe it is that they had to defend themselves growing up, either from their peers or even from their family. Sometimes people grow up in families where mom or dad is incredibly critical and controlling, and sometimes even verbally or emotionally abusive. So there might be a hypersensitivity where they have to protect or guard against people saying mean and hurtful things. Unfortunately, defensive people are hard to be around. They're not the kind of people that you want to spend a lot of time with. Remember, it's hard to hug a porcupine, someone who is angry or often critical or defensive. Sometimes underneath that defensiveness is insecurity. So they're protecting their ego because maybe their ego is fragile, or maybe it's been bruised a lot. So that contributes to their defensive posture. But those people are sometimes hard to love. They're hard to like, and they're hard to have a relationship with. So what can you do if you're interacting with a defensive person? Well, one thing you can do is not be defensive back or not attack back, because that just doesn't work. So maybe what you can do is find something that you can agree upon. Find a sliver of truth that you can identify with. Maybe you can also try, taking a softer approach, or even maybe if it gets ugly or if it gets conflictual, maybe you need to just kind of chill and take a break and not engage at a time where both parties are angry or hostile in their interaction. Defensive people often alienate others. So it may be that you can give them some support, some encouragement to take a look at what might be underneath their anger or the defensiveness. But do it at a time not when there is a conflict, obviously. Do it at a time when there's not a conflict. Sometimes writing a note or a letter, sometimes leaving that for them to read and reflect upon, it can be helpful. Defensive people often are defensive because of an issue that resides inside of them, and it may have nothing to do with you. So sometimes it helps for them to be a little introspective and maybe even journal or write about some of what they're feeling. Sometimes professional help will be beneficial for that type of person. But try loving them in spite of their defensiveness. Try identifying the good things, the positive things about them, and maybe even help bolster up their self-esteem or their ego, since that may be a factor. But defensiveness can be overcome. It can be something that people can change. So I encourage you to work on some of these solutions to dealing with this type of person. It'll better your relationships, and it'll help you draw closer to people that you love and that you care about. Until next time, Dr. Tony Ferretti.